Biology students. Well, it's week 3, and you have spent the last 2 weeks looking at evidence of evolution. So you looked at fossils and how they have changed over time, how there are intermediate forms of different species. You've looked at antibiotic resistance, how we need to take antibiotics until they're all gone, or we can become resistant to those antibiotics, how they can change over time, those bacteria cells, and homologous and vestigial structures, how we have vestigial or useless structures in our body, like our tailbone, and homologous structures where we can have similar arm bones. Like our arm bones look very similar to a cat or a horse, even though they have different functions. And then finally looked at DNA and how, if you can look at how closely related DNA is to see if we're closely or farther away related to different species. This week we are going to talk about natural selection and Charles Darwin. So we're looking at these notes. This is Charles Darwin, and he lived from 1809 to 1882. He loved insects as a child. He was not quite sure what he wanted to do as he got older. His father, who's listed, you can see right here, I'll circle it, thought he should follow in his footsteps and become a doctor. But when Darwin just tried to go into the medical field, he discovered he did not like blood. And this is 1809, so there isn't much anesthetic. So if they did any surgeries, they pretty much screamed until they passed out, which also Darwin did not find a great thing that he wanted to deal with. So he was trying to figure out what he was going to do, and then he met a naturalist who invited him to go on a voyage, and he decided to go and work for free. Here is Darwin's voyage on the Beagle. You can see where he left in Great Britain, and then you can see the arrows, how long he was gone. So he was gone for 5 whole years, and they pretty much traveled all around the world. So you can see the arrows are going down here. Went to South America. We're going to talk a little bit about here because these are the Galapagos Islands. We spent some time there, and he did research and collected species. You can see he went by Australia, and then he went by the tip of Africa, and then they went back to Europe. So he was gone for 5 years. The only problem with Darwin is that he was extremely seasick. So every time they were on the ship, he felt terrible. I couldn't imagine. Could you imagine being on a ship for 5 years and you would feel terrible every time you got on it? Whoops, I gotta make it smaller. Okay, so from that whole trip and being a naturalist and working for free, he did a lot of research, and he found that on the Galapagos Islands there was a whole bunch of different interesting creatures to him, like tortoises, finches, and iguanas that can swim. These are the only lizards that can swim in the world. It led him to realize that he could see that there are variations in these different species as he was looking at them, and they allow them to adapt. He also, on this journey, he could see that land is also changing. So if I go back here, you can see where he was at the South America. He went to these Andes mountains here, and he could see those mountains that were getting higher, or he found fossils that were shells that should have been at the bottom of the ocean that were now high up in the air, like they were up on this mountain. So at some point, those shells had to be underwater. So he knew that things were changing over time. And we're talking about evolution, and evolution is talking about how things and species change over time, and including our continents and land. Okay, so from all these studies that he did on that trip, he came up with the 4 main principles of natural selection. So the first one is saying that all variations are heritable. And there's variations in species, and they exist in populations. His famous one we're looking at here are his finches. Let me make that bigger. So these finches, you can see they have all these weird looking beaks. So in the Galapagos Islands, let me go back here. In the Galapagos Islands, look at how they are all kind of separate, and there's these small islands, and there wasn't a ton of food available. So if you go back, these different finches were found on these different islands, and these beaks show what they would eat. So they could have these big crushing bills that are here. They would be eating seeds. And they call these probing bills, and they could be eating cactus or insects. And there's other fruit eaters. So these bills had to do different things, and they were on different islands. So there were variations that were all finches, but the beaks looked very different. And that would be like what they were trying to eat. Okay, I'll make it smaller. He also said that many species are going to do overproduction, which of course is going to result in a competition for resources. And if we look at these, how many are going to survive? Are all of these baby ducks going to survive to become adults, or is something going to happen to them? Or these clownfish babies, are all of these, think about Nemo, would they all survive and become adults? No. So in wild, these organisms are producing lots of babies in hopes that maybe 1 or 2 will live to adulthood. Not like us. We don't have that worry. The third one was adaptations, and he said that variations that make an organism better fit to survive and produce more offspring. So when you look at this, we're saying fitness is how well an organism can live and reproduce. So the major goal of these organisms is to have babies, pass on their traits. So these organisms are pretty fit for where they're living, because this mossy frog here, he's hard to see. So is a predator going to eat him? It would be hard. The predator would be hard to see him. So he's maybe will live to pass on his traits. Or this moth, I guess this tree trunk, it's pretty hard to see that too, that moth is pretty fit. It's hopeful that fitness will allow it to reproduce. Or look at this spider. He's hard to see too. That the fitness is how long will they live, and will they live to pass on their traits? So adaptations are these variations. So here's a question for you. If we have these 2 rabbits right here, which one is more fit? Which means, which one do you think would live to reproduce and not be eaten by a predator? It makes a lot of sense, right? That you would say the brown one has a less likely chance of survival because the white one is blending into its environment, whereas with the snow, the brown one sticks out a little bit, so a fox maybe could see him easier and get him. We should also note that when I put the cartoon in here is that this beaver that's here saying chainsaw, 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 and then his hand changes to a chainsaw. Would that really happen? That those organisms don't think about this. It's just that if this rabbit up here dies, does he pass on his brown coat trait? He doesn't, so he can't pass it on. But this one will survive, and he's going to pass on the white coat, which will increase the population. So because it lives to reproduce, because it's fit, the white rabbits are going to become more common in the environment. But they can't think about it. Just like we can't wish that we were immune to the coronavirus. We don't know, there's different ways that people react to the coronavirus, but we don't know how we will react to it, and we can't wish it away. Hopefully they come up with a vaccine soon, and then we won't have to worry about that. The last one, the fourth one, is called descent with modification. So over time, favorable heritable adaptations become more common in a population. And I thought this one was good because this is an example of Darwin's actual paper that he's looking at there's common ancestor and how are species related to each other. And he said, I think, which is, he wasn't sure, but he was using his evidence to say, what would be my hypothesis of how this happens? And we can see this on this picture because you have an evolution of modern elephants, and their relatives. So you can see where we looked at where there are different intermediate species of these elephants until we get down here to our elephant of today. So these elephants look similar, but they have changed over time. So this elephant ancestor looks different from the modern day elephant down here. So as things pass on their traits, different traits become more common in the population. Okay, we're almost done. So the other thing we can talk about is that now we also have something called artificial selection. So there's our artificially selected, and that would be, I thought this was a good example looking at dogs and cats, because you can see dogs, they're all the same species, Canis familiaris, and cats, Felis catus, are all the same species, but look at how many different breeds of dogs you can get. Do you like large dogs, breeds of dogs? Do you like small breeds of dogs? Do you have allergies in your house? You can get dogs that are allergy-free, like our dog is considered allergy-free, but that means we have to get him groomed and get his hair cut because it keeps growing. But you can have short-haired cats, long-haired cats. We did this one with genetics. Remember, that was the calico cat, so we know that's a female. So we have all these different breeds that are there, and people decide what they like. So we are artificially choosing what kind of dogs or cats that are going to be made. That wouldn't happen in nature. All right. So, they were looking at, Darwin wasn't the only one. So when you're looking at saying, is he the only one that came up with this information? No. So at the same time that Darwin was studying about this, there was also Alfred Russel Wallace here. And he's not the only one too, but it's the only one I'm going to talk about that you're going to look at, is that he also looked at how things change over time. And if you remember from earth science, he talked a lot about fossils, and he found that on the edges of Africa and South America, that they look the same, those fossils look the same. So he talked about Pangea, saying that at one time Africa and South America had to have been joined, so organisms were just walking across and dying, living their lives, and that's why there are fossils that look the same on both places. So then Darwin got really nervous. He said, oh no, I have to get my book published. It took him, look how long it took him as he looked at his information, all the species collected on that ship for 5 years. He would collect species and brought back to England. It took him 20 years to come up with this book, but he did publish it in 1859, and he's the one that gets all of the credit for it, because his was very well thought out. He had tons of evidence for it, even more than what Alfred Russel Wallace had, and so Darwin gets the most credit. Okay, so for this week, you're going to do two things. I'm going to talk about a little virtual lab activity that you're going to do, and then we're going to read a cricket cartoon looking at the notes that we just covered. So 2 assignments that you're going to turn in for me this week. But you're doing great. I've seen lots of you are getting all your work done. But make sure you can always ask me questions on the office hours, and I will help you. Remember, those are 1 to 3. I know it's kind of weird to think of talking to your teacher on Teams, but I'm there every day. So use me if you have any questions this week. Otherwise, I hope you had a great Easter. And maybe I'll see you in the afternoon.